Road Trips and Missing Persons by Adriana in the Snow. Chapter 3. The man Virgil had carjacked, Patton, he had said, hummed a soft tune as he pulled back onto the interstate. Virgil glanced down at the ice cream in his hands and took a second bite. Was he actually serious about all this? Virgil was suspicious, but the guy had been nothing but surprisingly nice for someone who'd been kidnapped. The nicer he was, the worse Virgil felt about the whole breaking into his car and threatening him at knife point thing. Maybe that was the point? Maybe he was hoping Virgil would feel bad enough to eventually just tell him to drive to the police station so he could turn himself in? Not likely. It didn't matter how nice the dude was to him. He was not going anywhere his mother might be able to find him. Nope, not happening. Not after what had happened earlier in the day. He's just lucky he'd been snooping in his dad's room trying to find where the man had hidden the Game Boy, and found whatever radio thing Dad had hidden beneath a floorboard under his bed. Well, lucky was perhaps not the right word, he thought as he stuffed an even larger spoonful of ice cream into his mouth while trying to force himself not to cry. Nothing was lucky about today. He didn't know why his dad had the radio thing. He was pretty sure at this point he didn't know a lot of things. All he knew was that it was some type of communication device, and his mother's voice would have been undeniably clear on it even if the people hadn't been calling her by name. He hadn't known what on earth was going on. All he knew was that he'd backed away from it in horror and confusion when the message that Remington Gates was dead came through. Mom had said good. He'd hoped it had been some kind of trick, but when some guy had broken into the house to take him to his mother not even 10 minutes later, he'd pieced together the truth. His dad was dead. His mom had killed him, and whatever her plans were for Virgil, Virgil didn't want any part of it. Luckily, when he was 12, he'd watched a horror movie and hadn't slept for a week. His dad had solved the problem by showing him how to use pepper spray effectively and then letting him keep a can of it in his nightstand in case anyone ever broke in to try and kidnap him. Virgil was pretty sure Dad hadn't ever thought someone would break in to try and kidnap him. He'd pepper sprayed the guy Mom had sent and grabbed a knife from the kitchen before booking it out the back door. The options had been the park, the grocery store, or try to make it to the nearest bus stop and hope a bus arrived soon. In a bid to be unpredictable, he'd gone to the grocery store. Of course, he needed to get out of the neighborhood, and fast, but he knew a bus or any form of public transport would be easily trackable. The only solution was a car, but the problems with that were that Virgil didn't have a car, he didn't know how to hotwire a car, and his only experience driving had been when his older brother allowed him to drive a golf cart when he was 7 and he drove it into a pond. Which led him here, in a stranger's car, after waiting for him to come out of the store in the back seat and pressing a kitchen knife up against his neck. It had been a day. He finished the entire giant concrete ice cream thing Patton had got him and stuck it in the bag with the rest of the trash. "Want to listen to the radio?" Patton asked. "Passenger gets to choose the station." Sure." Virgil reached forward to flip it on. They were far enough out of range to whatever station Patton had last listened to in town was now just static, so Virgil started to mess with the dials. There didn't seem to be any music stations that adhered to his tastes, so he just ended up on some pop station. He was just settling back into his seat when Patton's phone started to ring from where he'd tossed it when he'd gotten in the car at the grocery store. Virgil blinked at the phone. "Is that the Mission Impossible theme song?" he asked. "Yes." "Why does it sound like that?" "It's the kazoo version," Patton explained. "Why?" Patton just smiled. "I should probably answer it." "No," Virgil said. "You're not allowed to answer it." Patton shrugged. The music stopped after a few more seconds and then started up right after that. "It's my brother. He's going to keep calling," Patton informed him. "And if I don't answer, he's going to call the cops because he assumed I was kidnapped. Which, in this case..." "Shit," Virgil said as the ringing stopped again, only to pick up once more a moment later. "Shit, fine. You can answer it, but I'm putting it on speaker, and don't try to tell him anything." "Yeah, all right," Patton agreed easily. Oh God, this was a bad idea. Virgil grabbed the phone and accepted the call before putting it on speaker. "Hi-lo." "Why aren't you answering your home phone?" "I'm not at home," Patton said. "Where are you?" Patton considered it for a moment. "I'm on a road trip." "A road trip." the man on the other side of the line asked blankly. What do you mean? I mean, I got in my car and now I'm driving. You were supposed to be home all week, Patton. I need you to be in the city right now. Where are you? Virgil shook his head wildly. I don't know, Patton said thoughtfully. A road. Patton. The man groaned. Why? It's just a thing that happened, Lo. Sorry if you needed me. How is a road trip a thing that just happens, Patton? He asked. Patton glanced at Virgil. It just did? He said. Patton! Anyway, I'm a little bit busy, so talk to you later. Patton, do not hang up the phone. Love you, Logie! He jerked his head at Virgil, and Virgil hit the end call button. The second the call ended, Virgil groaned. It would have been better if you just didn't answer. The Mission Impossible song kazoo version started playing again. It'll be best if you just turn that off, Patton said. Won't he just call the cops? Patton gave him a secret smile. No, he'll just think I'm being silly and ignoring him. Do you do stuff like that often? Virgil asked. Just enough so he doesn't ask questions when I don't want him to, Patton divulged. It's a little brother thing, you know. Virgil flinched just a bit. A brother thing. He wondered where his brother was now. He'd always been nice to Virgil, but he'd also always been obedient to Mom. He wondered if he knew about Virgil's dad. The two had always gotten along, even though he wasn't Janice's father, but Mom was... Mom. Virgil didn't want to know whose side he'd take. The ringtone ended and started to back up once again. Virgil held down the power button until it turned off and decided to store it in the glove compartment so Patton couldn't reach it as easily. Though perhaps he should have thought of that earlier, but he was new to the whole kidnapping thing. He sat back against the seat and started rubbing at the sleeves of his hoodie. Everything okay over there? Patton asked. I'm fine, Virgil snapped, and then bristled under the raised eyebrow he got in return. This radio station is just stupid, he grumbled. Well, you can change it, Patton pointed out. The radio station wasn't actually the problem, but it did give him something to do with his hands. He reached forward and started fiddling with the radio dials. About 10 minutes later, he hit a radio station that wasn't music, but just some guy talking. Virgil paused on the station and sat back. Whoever the guy was, his voice was low and soothing. Virgil closed his eyes and listened for a few minutes before he let out a startled chuckle. He's talking about Mothman? He opened his eyes to see Patton's face crinkled up in a soft smile. He is. Virgil couldn't help but start to giggle. He laughed so hard it started to blur into sobbing. He felt a gentle touch on his knee and looked over at Patton. There are tissues in the glove box, he told Virgil. Virgil nodded and reached forward into the glove box to grab the Kleenex box while still sniffling. He blotted at his eyes and blew his nose before sticking the dirty tissue into his hoodie pocket. Today had been a horrible day. He was exhausted. He leaned back against the seat and his eyes flickered closed. Do you want me to change the radio station? Patton asked softly. Virgil laughed again and barely restrained himself from going into another fit. No, he said. It's fine. I've got to hear how it ends. That's fair, Patton said, and though Virgil had his eyes closed, he imagined he was shooting him one of those confusing soft smiles again. The conspiracy theory radio guy kept blathering on about sightings of Mothman in a deceptively calm tone. Wow, Virgil was tired. Falling asleep while the guy you carjacked drove probably wasn't a good idea. That was one of the last coherent thoughts he had before he drifted off to sleep.